Hello, everybody, and Happy New Year to everybody. Happy New Year, Kelly.
Thanks, Alex. Happy New Year to you. 2024. I can't believe we made it.
We made it. And not only do we make it to 2024, but we made it to season 3. Can you believe it?
Dude, it feels like we just started. It feels like we're still in the land of Andre the Giant and Colonel Sanders, but we've moved on.
Season 1 was 9 episodes. We started with Andre the Giant, Colonel Sanders, and Houdini. And then season 2, you know how many? We had 25 episodes in season 2.
Well, that kind of makes sense because we did them every other week, and we pretty much did the whole year. So every other week for a year would be, is that right? 52 weeks in a year, so 26?
Yeah. So that's 34 episodes, about 32 different people, because Rock and Roll was about several people, two-parter, but no person.
Well, and then St. Nicholas was also a team sport, so we didn't. Oh yeah, but I guess it still counts as one.
I thought you were going to say because St. Nick is also Father Christmas and Father Noel.
Right.
And
it's like 11 people.
And don't forget about Stubby and
right.
If you haven't listened to the St. Nick, it's not too late. Even though it's after Christmas, you can still listen to the St. Nicholas episode. And
you can get ahead for next year.
Yeah, definitely. Well, before I get started on who I want to talk about today, I want to run something by you. So about 10 years ago, Wired magazine decided they wanted to figure out how many famous people were alive. Have you heard of this?
No. I love Wired, though.
Yeah. So how would you go about, if you wanted to figure out how many famous people there were, how would you go about doing that?
In today's day and age?
Yeah. This is 10 years ago. So yeah, sure. Same methodology today, I'd say.
Yeah, I'd say social media.
Kind of, yeah. So they figured out, they just looked to see how many, they went to Wikipedia.
Okay.
And I don't know if you've ever been to Wikipedia, but
no, I don't. Never used it.
So on Wikipedia, you can actually click on living people, and they'll tell you all the living people that are on Wikipedia. And so at the time, this was 2013, there were 604,000 living people, 604,174 living people on Wikipedia.
Meaning that had a Wikipedia had a Wikipedia listing.
Right. Like an individual people that had not Wikipedia pages, but people that had Wikipedia pages. So there's about 7 billion people on Earth, give or take. So then they extrapolated that and figured, well, at that rate, or at that proportion, there was about 28,000 famous people living in the U.S. 28,000 famous people. Famous meaning they have a Wikipedia page living in the U.S.
Okay. Yeah, that seems like a low number.
28,000 famous people that are alive?
Out of what, 330 million people?
Yeah.
In the U.S.?
You think there's more famous people than that? All right, name them. Let's go. Name them.
All right, hold on.
So they said if you include dead people, and this is where we come in, and this is our bailiwick, is famous dead people, right? Or at least interesting dead people. They said if you include dead people, there's about 100,000 people, or total, which means there's about 70,000 people eligible for this show.
Really? And that
was as of 10 years ago. And think of all the people that have died. Yeah. And we haven't actually, we've done several people that aren't Americans on this. Can you name 3?
Non-famous
no, people that aren't Americans.
Or famous un-Americans. Not un-Americans.
Un-Americans.
Famous foreigners. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
That we've done?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So let me see. I'm going back. Well, Andre the Giant was born in France.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, he did live in the U.S. eventually. We did Shackleton. He was English.
Sure.
And we did, I'm trying to think of, Barnum was American. P.T. Barnum. Oh, Jerry Springer was actually born in
Yeah,
England. Now
that's a reach, but sure. Chef Boyardee,
he was born in England.
Chef Boyardee, Albert Einstein, Nostradamus, Saint Valentine, uh, sure, Mother Teresa, Henry VIII.
Yeah,
Right?
I wonder what the proportion of Americans to non-Americans is. Probably like 2/3 American people on Dirt Nap City and 1/3 non-American.
And I was surprised to learn that Julia Child was American.
You were? How come?
So remember, there's about 70,000 eligible people for the show 10 years ago. And there's been about between 9 and 13,000 Wikipedia people that died each year since then.
Yeah.
So, that's a bunch of folks we have to catch up.
Yeah.
And, at this clip that we're going every other week, I'm not sure we're going to make it. So today I'm going to double my efforts and I'm going to talk about two people. I don't know if I'm breaking any kind of Dirt Nap City code here, but we got to speed this up. So I'm going to talk about two people.
You've already done that once with the Pilgrims, right? You talked about a whole bunch of people.
Well, with rock and roll, we talked about a few folks too. I mean, Leonard Skinner alone knocked 20 of them off.
Right. Yeah, so two people.
Yeah. Inextricably linked, though.
Like Captain and Tennille.
Like you never would talk about one of these without the other. And it's not the Captain and Tennille.
Alex and Kelly.
No, we're not dead, man.
Oh yeah. I'm just giving examples of inextricably linked.
Yeah, okay. I got you.
Laurel and Hardy.
So let me tell you about these folks. They're inextricably linked. You wouldn't even know them by their first name, only their last names.
Okay.
And one of the guys was born in 1910, actually in New Mexico territory, which isn't at all a clue on who he is. But I thought that was a little interesting tidbit that he wasn't born in an American state in 1910. New Mexico wasn't a state yet.
Okay.
Died in 2001 in Los Angeles. The other guy was born in 1911 in New York City and died in 2006 in Los Angeles. Now, what do we know about people that died in Los Angeles? What probably
entertainers.
They're entertainers. So
entertainers.
They're in the entertainment business. They have won an Academy Award and 7, I think, Emmys. And would be known for television, color television, and specifically on a particular day of the week that you would watch them on their shows on television.
Like Saturday Night Live.
Saturday, true, but not night.
Saturday morning.
Oh.
I was going with Siegfried and Roy originally, but now it sounds like I'm off. That's not right.
Are they both dead? I think we've talked about this before. I think this is not the first time Siegfried and Roy have come up on this show.
So Saturday morning TV, two people together, and they were born in the 1910, 1911. Laurel and Hardy?
No.
I said that a few minutes ago. And was it a children's show?
Sure. Lots of different children's shows on Saturday morning. What did you used to watch on Saturday mornings?
I mean, I think it was the typical Bugs Bunny, Roadrunner, Scooby Doo.
Scooby Doo was one of theirs.
Hanna-Barbera.
Hey. I don't know if you thought Hanna-Barbera was one lady, but it's two people.
I am Hanna-Barbera. Yeah, okay. No, I don't know anything about these guys.
Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera.
Wow, okay. And they were in, they did a bunch of, Scooby Doo was right up their alley. I'm trying to think of other Hanna-Barbera. I can even see the logo right now. What were some other shows they did?
Well, they started with Tom and Jerry, which I'll talk about that. But when we were kids, I mean, it was It was the Flintstones and the Jetsons
Oh,
and Scooby Doo, and later they worked on this. They did the Smurfs. Um,
wow.
Lots of Magilla Gorilla, all those kind of
Jabberjaw.
Jabberjaw.
Jabber
Yeah, these are the
Remember
kind of shows
Jabberjaw?
I think I didn't have a lot of respect at the time for Hanna-Barbera shows. I thought they were really kind of cheap looking, compared to like the Bugs Bunny or definitely Disney stuff. Uh, it seemed like they just churned a bunch of it out. Adam Ant, Johnny Quest, Josie and the Pussycats, Quick Draw McGraw, these kind of things that were just kind
All these
of
shows with teenagers solving mysteries.
a lot of them, yeah, a lot of them. Yogi Bear,
Yeah. Hey, boo boo.
but definitely the kind of things that came out in the late 60s and 70s that we used to consume as children. And this is kind of my wheelhouse, the things that we were into as children. So let me tell you about these guys. So Bill Hanna, that is, he started working, like a lot of these people from the 20th century, these characters that were born in like the 1910s, they seem to just be 20 years old and all of a sudden they're working like in Hollywood, right? And these guys are
And they
no,
drove an ambulance
yeah,
in
yeah,
World War
or
One,
that.
right?
Yeah, that's another way to do it. So he started working at Pacific Title and Arts at 20, and then and then from there, the studio that made Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies. Now, do you know the difference between Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies? They didn't do that, but do you know the difference?
I no, I remember both logos, and I think Looney Tunes was more pop or more well known, but
It
I
was
remember
actually
Merry
the
Melodies.
same characters, and think Looney Tunes was in black and white when it first started, and Merry Melodies was in color. And but they kind of had the same characters. They were made by the same studio. And then once Looney Tunes got in color, then there was no difference. They would just put those of course weren't for television. That was like in the 1940s. They would put those out in 30s. They would put those out before movies. They were just shorts that they would put out there, and that had Bugs and Daffy and all your favorites. Those
What did
Looney
they
Tunes
call
guys.
that? Was there a word for that when you went to the movie theater? There was the previews. Well, the previews were all the previews for other movies, but was
Like
there
trailers,
the
yeah.
trailers? Yeah, yeah, but then those early cartoons, like now a lot of theaters have started doing that again. Like Alamo Drafthouse has a bunch of like little clips from old stuff.
Oh,
It's
really?
very entertaining. Yeah.
And Pixar has actually started putting those in at the beginning of they make short films before, and some of those are really good. Some of those short ones from Pixar are really
The
good.
little lamp bouncing around.
Yeah, I think that's just a logo thing. That's not a whole show, but um so then he went to that studio, and then all of a sudden he became the head of ink and paint. He wasn't he was an artist, but he was probably overqualified to be where he was, but he also wrote music. In fact, later on he was the one that this is Bill now that wrote the theme to the Flintstones. Um and then he went over to MGM, and you can imagine that all those places were kind of probably in the same area in LA, right? All the studios. And when he got to MGM, he had a desk opposite Joseph Barbera, and those two became partners for 60 years. They worked
Wow.
beside Tex Avery at one point. Those were the ones I liked. The Droopy,
Yeah.
and those yeah. Those were some weird ones, but yeah, they worked for 60 years together. And the funny part is they each wrote an autobiography. I don't know. I mean, I'm guessing if you read one, you'd read the other, but it would almost, I mean, they couldn't cover the same ground probably, right?
Personal life, maybe outside of work, or their true feelings about, I mean, like, if you and I wrote an autobiography, a lot of it would be like, yours would probably focus on how much I interrupt you, right? And
Mhm.
then mine would focus on how much you don't interrupt me when I wanna be interrupted.
I get it. I get it. So these guys worked together for 60 years. They each wrote a autobiography. They were completely different guys though. I mean, they didn't have much in common. They didn't socialize. They were really good friends in work. but outside, they were completely different dudes. Joe Barbera was an artist, started as a boxer, like he was like a Gold Gloves boxer as an adolescent, and then he was an artist, and he'd send his drawings to all the popular magazines when he was a kid, like the Saturday Evening Post and those kind of magazines. And he actually one time wrote to Walt Disney for advice, and Disney wrote back and said, "Hey, let's do a phone call sometime," but that phone call actually never happened. But then he ended up going to MGM and sitting right across from Bill. So Bill and Joe sat across from each other. Eventually, they got their own. They got their opportunity to write something together, and they wrote a cartoon called "Puss Gets the Boot," 1940,
Yeah. That's a
and
very 1940s title.
yeah, exactly.
You
So it
really
was
wouldn't
like
see that you wouldn't see that title
no,
today.
probably Puss Gets the Boot. So Puss Gets the Boot was, of course, a play on the Puss in Boots, and it was a cat and mouse type of story, and it was very, very similar to what you'd see on Tom and Jerry today, where the cat is chasing the mouse and tortures him and all that. But they weren't called Tom and Jerry. I don't think the mouse had a name in that show, and I think the cat's name was Jasper. But that was actually nominated for an Academy Award for Best Short Cartoon in 1940. So this is just to give you some context. This is the year after Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind. So this is a long time ago. And then they even coming off an Academy Award nomination, their supervisor came in and he said, "All right, guys, no more cat and mouse cartoons."
I'm done playing cat and mouse with you.
And this guy's name was Fred Quimby. And I don't know if he was the inspiration for Mayor Quimby on The Simpsons, but apparently this guy was a real SOB. They said he was kind of like the principal of the office. He was the no fun guy. He had zero sense of humor, but he worked for a cartoon company where they were churning out cartoons.
How do you have no sense of humor and work for a company making cat and mouse videos or films?
They said this guy had no sense of humor. He didn't even get most of the cartoons. But here's the thing: he was listed as the producer for every Tom and Jerry cartoon.
Yeah, I feel like I
And
saw that. I feel like I've seen that.
Quimby,
Yeah.
he was listed as a producer, and every time they got an award, like an Emmy or something like that, he would accept the award, and he never once invited Hanna or Barbera on stage to accept the award.
So he was like the suit.
He was definitely. He was like the stereotypical suit that wasn't a creative. He didn't he never created anything, but he accepted all the awards and didn't recognize the guys who did. He's just kind of that's like a archetype, right? Of the suit that gets in the creative's way but takes all the credit for other stuff.
Yeah. I know that's
He was like one of the first that did that. So he says no cat and mouse cartoons, but eventually gave in, and that gave birth to Tom and Jerry. Like if they had listened to him, we'd have no Tom and Jerry. And Tom and Jerry are pretty. I mean, I just kind of dumped on the later Hanna-Barbera stuff a while ago, but Tom and Jerry is pretty good, timeless stuff.
it's iconic. Yeah.
It's iconic. It's classic. It's other than Disney, it's probably right up there with. I mean, that's in the pop culture, right? Everyone knows Tom and Jerry, and it's timeless. I mean, it's a story of a cat torturing a mouse, and everything backfires on him, right? Though every time he tries something, it backfires, and he's the one that ends up getting hurt, and the mouse gets away.
There's some odd things about Tom and Jerry, though, and one of them is, and tell me if I'm just misremembering here, but I thought there were some episodes where Tom's chasing Jerry and trying to catch him, and Jerry's, Tom's actually getting physically hurt, frying pans and
Right? Yeah,
running
yeah.
into painted mouse holes that aren't
Yep.
really there, and smashing his face,
He
all the
never
stuff that
learns.
happened.
Right.
So, but then it seemed like there were episodes of Tom and Jerry where they were friends
Yes.
where they cooperated and stuff
Yeah.
happened
I
together.
can
Now,
picture
was
them
that a
shaking hands.
yeah, yeah, holding hands and walking together. Was that something that happened later in Tom and Jerry, or was that like they would just mix it up?
No, I think you're right. I think that's I haven't researched this, but now that you say that, I think you're right, and I think that's a symptom of kind of the '70s, with the way cartoons had done it, and the look of it got a lot cheaper, which I'll talk about. But I think you're right. I think even the plots changed. I mean, you can only do so many, right?
Yeah,
Of
yeah. Maybe that was it. They just ran out of. But you mentioned Quimby um a
suit.
inspiration for Mayor Quimby on The Simpsons. I don't think that was the case. I think Mayor Quimby on The Simpsons was inspired by like the Kennedys because he had that thick Boston
No, I just
accent.
mean the name.
Um, could be, but well, and this would make more sense. Itchy and Scratchy, of course, are Tom
Of
and Jerry.
course. Yeah, of course. Of
So
course. They actually did 114 shorts of Tom and Jerry. And none of those were for TV. They were all, this is the 1940s.
on
And
film
then
reels, on
and
film
the,
spools.
and they even did World War II training films with Tom and Jerry, telling you how to beat the Nazis, for soldiers. And Tom and Jerry won 7 Academy Awards. It sounds
I
funny
also
to
always
say
kind
that.
of wondered if Jerry, because Jerry was a term. I don't know if it was a derogatory term for Germans or if it was just a term for Germans at the
What
time
Jerry
too.
was?
Yeah, GER, like German Jerry.
I never heard that.
Yeah,
Well, they did that for, good 15, 20 years or 17 years. In 1957, MGM closed the cartoon division and laid everyone off by phone call, which seems very time consuming. Like today, you'd send out an email, you'd just,
yeah, you're all fired.
or you'd do a Zoom call where everybody's on it. And we see how that goes. But laying everybody off by a phone call, I feel if I was the last guy to get called, I'd probably know by now. Like all my friends would have told
Mm,
me.
yeah, but how do they? I mean, they can't really call you because they're on another call and they only have one line. They can't text you. They can't email you. They might have telegraphed you.
I'm in the M's, you're in the S's. I get fired, and then I call you right away and go, "Oh, did you hear?"
But you get a busy signal because I'm on the call with management at that
Not
point.
yet, because they have to go one by one by one by one
Oh,
by. They have to
you
go
mean
through
the
the N's.
NOPQRS?
Exactly,
Okay, gotcha.
exactly.
Yeah, all right.
So these guys decided to go on their own, and they said, "Well, we're 2 people. How do we decide? Hanna or Barbera, which ones comes first?" And they did what friends do. They flipped a coin. So
Yeah,
nice.
yeah.
Nobody was the alpha of this partnership. So they called themselves HB Enterprises. Hanna won the coin
Okay.
flip, and that didn't last very long. And they changed it to Hanna-Barbera. And the first cartoon that they decided after Tom and Jerry about the cat and mouse was called Rough and Ready, and it was about a cat and a dog.
Wow.
Ruff was the dog.
Yeah, of course.
I think Ruff should have been the cat, though. That's more mixing it up a little. But
Yeah, yeah,
RUF, it's RUFF, of course.
yeah.
And Reddy was the cat. So they weren't branching out a whole lot, going to a cat and dog. And of course, the dog chased the cat in this one. But that was the very first Saturday morning cartoon ever, was Rough and Ready.
They got a sponsorship from, like, a cereal company or a toy company or
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned cereals and toys. Those were the things that people loved about Saturday mornings.
yeah.
Well, then they came out with the Huckleberry Hound show. You remember
Oh, yeah.
Huckleberry Hound?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
He
And
had a
then
Southern accent, right?
he did. Kind of an Alabama accent. He kind of had easygoing accent. He wore a hat.
Droopy face.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep, yep.
And then Yogi Bear came out around the same time. Well, they did a poll in 1960 to find out, who was watching this show, and they found that half of the viewers were adults that were watching Huckleberry Hound. And Huckleberry Hound, I think, it won an Emmy. That was the first Emmy they had won. So they thought, well, this isn't just for children. So they decided they were going to put out a prime time show. So they came out with the Flintstones.
Yeah, the Simpstones.
This is 20, 25, 27 years before The Simpsons came in prime time. The Flintstones, which, the Flintstones is just a ripoff of The Honeymooners, the show with
Yes.
Jackie
Yes.
Gleason.
Yep.
It's an absolute ripoff of that show, but it started in 1960. It was put in prime time on ABC, uh, and it had a laugh track, and it was in black and white actually too. The first 2 seasons.
I thought it was filmed in, like, 6 million BC.
Oh, no, no, it wasn't, no, those were just, characters.
Oh, the dinosaurs weren't real. Okay.
No, no. So, 1960, the first 2 seasons were in black and white. That's how long ago the Flintstones came out.
And they were sponsored by a cigarette company.
I think they were at the beginning. Yeah, I think there's some
Yeah,
videos you
yeah.
can
I
watch
remember that.
where
There's
Fred
there's films
Flintstone's.
of them, Fred and Barney talking about, how great their cigarettes taste.
Yeah. And then this was going really well for them. People were watching, and it had a laugh track just like, the other shows of the day, like your
Honeymooners,
Bewitched, and well, the Honeymooners was a lot earlier than that.
live
You know, the
studio
Honey
audience, probably.
Yeah, Honeymooners was like in the 50s. This
Okay.
was a rip off of that, but it was later. Then they came out with the Jetsons, which was just a space version of the Flintstones.
Right, right.
So these guys, they don't get super creative. You go from a cat and mouse to a dog and a cat to
Yeah,
the
they found a
Flintstones.
formula that worked and just went with it.
Flintstones is the Honeymooners. The Jetsons is the Flintstones. You're right. They came up, and that was, I think, the secret to their success was formulas. But I think it turns out that's what viewers wanted too. They wanted, this was right at the beginning of color TV. TVs were really popular, and people just like to turn it on, and it wasn't like today when people are seeking programming. You would just turn it on, and whatever's on, you would watch, and you would literally just look at the TV.
And if you already understood the dynamics and the archetypes and everything that's going on, you already know if you know who um, Fred Flintstone was, then you knew who George Jetson was, basically.
Yeah, but here's the thing, that unlike the Tom and Jerry's or even a lot of the Disney cartoons that were happening, like, when you think about Steamboat Willie and things like that, where it's one character basically chasing another all over the place. These shows actually had plots, were character driven. I mean, they weren't real deep, but they had a plot. In fact, it was the plot that made the show, not the art that made the show. In fact, later on, when animation became very expensive, that's how they survived, because it was never really about the art, anyways, for them. It was about the story, the plots, and that's so they mimicked what uh, the live action shows were.
Yeah, and it was probably in some ways cheaper to produce those than it was to produce real ones because
So much
they're
cheaper.
they're paying voice actors, but there's no sets. There's no pretty much anything they can imagine. They don't have to come up with a set for the Flintstones with fake dinosaurs in the background. They can just draw them.
And just like The Simpsons, you don't have to have, if you have 50 characters in a show, that could be 4 actors.
Yeah, yeah. Hank Azaria, I'm looking at you.
Yeah. So you can just pay one person. So it was, yeah, they're a lot cheaper than live action shows. So the Jetsons came out in 1962. That was the first ABC show in color.
Wow.
Flintstones were still in black and white, and the Jetsons were in color, kind of giving it that futuristic look. So this was 1962. The Jetsons took place in 2062. Did you know that?
No, no.
100 years in the
Wow.
future.
So we're actually coming up on that.
Well, in fact, George Jetson was 40 years old. He says there's an episode where he's at the doctor's office, and the doctor says, well, it looks like you're going to live to be 150. And then George says, oh, good. I have another 110 good years in me. And so that means he was 40, right? Well, if he was 40, that means he was born in 2022.
Wow.
So
he's Gen Z.
He's Gen Z, or maybe whatever after Gen Z, maybe. Jane was 2 years younger, so she was born in 2024.
This is kind of mind blowing,
which is this year, right? Jane,
yeah.
This is the year that Jane's Jetson's born, and Elroy is born in 2053.
Wow,
because he was like 9. He was 9.
Yeah.
So season 1 of the Jetsons, this is crazy, was 1962, and it was 24 episodes. All right, 1962 was season 1. Season 2 was in 1985. 23
What?
years later, they just hung on those 24 episodes, the ones that we watched when we were kids. We were watching the same 24 episodes from 1962 over and over and over
So they only
again.
had one episode or one
One
season
season.
in the 60s and
And
the
they didn't start
70s.
another season until we were 15. So I know we never
Wow.
saw any of those. And there was 41 episodes in season 2 in 1985.
Do they look similar?
I think they do, yeah, because it's that
Yeah.
Hanna-Barbera style that's real
Yeah,
cheap.
yeah.
Did you know the Jetsons didn't live in space? They lived on
No,
Earth.
they lived on Earth in a sort of domed apartment kind of thing, like a yeah.
Well, remember though, if you can picture that they lived in these
They were
buildings
floating.
that were the buildings were like looked like the Space Needle. Every one of them
Yeah,
like was like a
yeah.
giant, and they explained it in one of the, I don't know if it was a movie or what, but they explained that they had to be way up in the sky to escape the smog. So to them, Earth, we
Ah,
just kept going up and up and up and up and up to get rid of the smog rather than
right.
doing something about the smog. We just kept going higher and higher. And that's why we needed flying cars, because we were lived up in the cloud. So they were on Earth, but they lived basically in the clouds. But I always thought they lived on another planet.
No, I knew it was Earth. I knew it was Earth, and it was. I mean, if you think about Lando Calrissian and Cloud City and in Empire Strikes Back, that's kind of the same thing. They're all up in clouds, and it's just all clouds below them.
Yeah, people say that they predicted a lot of the future. Of course, they had watches that like Apple watches. They had
Yeah,
video phones.
yeah.
What else? They had robots,
Rosie
maids.
the robot
Yeah,
wasn't Rosie their maid? And you remember I do remember like one episode where George is at work and he comes home and and I think didn't he have like a recliner that picked him up and like
yeah,
his
yeah,
slippers got put on automatically and
yeah.
he gets handed a drink and all this
Yep.
stuff. But he comes home and he's like, "Ah, long day, honey." Pushing that button over and over again. And that's all he
Oh,
did was he pushed a button at
I've
work.
got the quote here. You're right on it, man.
Okay.
There was an episode where he complained of his heavy workload. He said, "Is tiring pushing a button on and off as many as 5 times for 3 hours, 3 days a week."
Yeah, yeah.
So I love their commentary. And I guess people in the 60s thought that things are getting so advanced that the people of the future will barely have to work. And to
Yeah.
them, work will be pushing a button 5 times a day for 3 hours, 3 hours. And the rest of the time, because computers and robots are going to do everything, all the rest of the time, we're going to have free time.
Of course, they wouldn't think about the fact that the button could be located at your house instead of you having to go to an office to push a button, right? Or a factory.
but we see that a lot about predictions of the future, and we always assume that people in the future are going to have more free time than we do, and it's never accurate, right?
Well,
And it never will be accurate.
there's this weird thing about retro future, right? It's like future the way it was predicted in the 60s. It has a vibe
Yeah,
to it, don't
yeah,
you
of
think?
course. Oh,
The
absolutely.
look
Yeah.
of everything, the flying cars, the but so much of it, with the exception now there are getting to be flying cars, but just like everybody being in a flying car, I guess when George is 40, that's about 40 years from now, or 38 years from now, maybe we all will be hovering around in flying cars. They might have been spot on with that, but I still want a flying car right now. I want to go out and zip to work.
It'd be cool if you were the only one that had one, but imagine if everyone that has a car also has a flying car, and all the traffic just is the same as it is now, but it's 3,000 feet in the sky. That would be chaos.
Well, that's what's going on with Amazon and drone deliveries and all that stuff right now. Is they're trying to sort out all the different lanes in the sky, but you have three dimensions to work in instead of just a flat plane, right? So you can you pass from below, right, instead of from above,
I
like
would figure
passing
that
in the
a
left lane.
drone pilot would want a flying car. I
Yeah,
should have known that.
yeah, of course.
So overall, these guys produced over 3,000 half-hour shows, and I mentioned some of the ones. Uh, Oddly enough, the ones that they seem to get the most awards for was the Smurfs, which I've never seen one Smurf episode. That was a little Well, it came out in 1981. I guess.
We were sort of middle school and high school
Yeah,
at
you
that
don't watch
point, right?
cartoons then for sure. No.
I remember our neighbors were into the Smurfs, and I did watch some episodes. And here's the thing: all you have to know about the Smurfs is every other word was Smurf. So it would be like Smurfy Smurf, Alex Smurf, with your Smurfing with your Smurf Smurf Smurf.
So much for Hanna-Barbera being all about dialogue and plot. And yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You remember? Do you remember their? Do you remember the Smurfs bad guy, their foil, the guy that
I'd never
chased them
watched the
around?
Smurfs. I've never seen it.
Gargamel.
I would
Gargamel.
I would have lost the trivia contest
Yeah.
there. Well, other artists did not like these guys. Maybe unsurprisingly, they thought that their work was really cheap, and because it was focused on plot and character and not art, that there was nothing beautiful. You hear about cells of Looney Tunes going for, and maybe animation cells go for a lot on these guys too, but. Uh, you don't hear a lot of respect. Maybe the Norman Rockwell of the cartoon world, how Norman Rockwell didn't get a lot of respect for a long time from other artists.
Just cranked out a lot of content and it looked cheap
And the
to them.
technology changed a lot because studios were not paying what they had fewer resources to spend on this stuff. So like in a 7-minute cartoon, uh previously would be like 14,000 drawings in a 7-minute cartoon, like a Bugs Bunny cartoon. That in the 60s was down to 2,000 drawings. And they would do some of those tricks that we talked about in the Walt Disney episode where they would put
Yeah.
background, just put a static background and then have the people move through a static background, that repetitive background. And that's actually the way The Simpsons is today. I mean, a lot of this, the animation you see now is just like Hanna-Barbera's. We never went back to the way things were in the Walt Disney Looney Tunes day. It's just too expensive to make. And of course now it's all digital, but the look of The Simpsons is more similar to Hanna-Barbera than it is to the old school cartoons of Warner Brothers.
For television cartoons, for Saturday morning television cartoons, but and maybe even episodic, evening primetime shows like The Simpsons. But ultimately, though, I think there are still really beautifully done animations, but they're the theaters, they're the movies, right? They're the Pixar movies, and there's a lot of detail and a lot of thing going on in them. But
And they cost millions of dollars to make.
yes, it's two different animals, right? It's the difference between, again, watching a weekly, it's listening to Dirt Nap City and seeing us live. Two different animals.
Mm-hmm. Well, they sold their company in 1966 for 12 million bucks. And
Wow.
then they remained in charge as part of the deal. They remained in charge until 1991, and when it was sold to Turner for $320 million.
I was gonna say 12 million seems really cheap for the
Yeah.
IP behind the Flintstones. I mean, just they probably make more money than that on the vitamins, right? I mean,
Yeah, right.
Flintstones vitamin. Can you name any other cartoon that's made into vitamins?
And
No.
I don't understand. There hasn't been a Flintstones episode in decades, yet Flintstone vitamins still exist.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's what kids know them as now.
What was cool though is then those two guys got to work on this film versions of Scooby Doo, the live action ones that they did for
Yeah.
Scooby Doo in 2002, and the Flintstones live action that they did in 1994. These guys were working on it, so they didn't push them to the side like Quimby did. One thing that I want to note is that friendship. You mentioned Tom and Jerry being friends. In all of the Hanna-Barbera cartoons, they seem to be a running theme of, Yogi and Boo Boo, friend Barney, and Wilma and Betty, and they all revolved around friendships and kind of mirrored these guys' friendships. But they did hang out in different circles. That Bill used to hang out with other animators. Boring. Animators have got to be kind of boring guys, right?
Bill was Hannah.
Bill Hanna, and then Joe used to hang out with celebrities. Like he's hung out with celebrities like Zsa Zsa Gabor. Like he ran with that crowd, like Merv Griffin and those guys.
Nice.
And they rarely talked to each other outside of work, but for 60 years they worked, and maybe that was their secret. that they just, were work
Yeah.
buddies. They worked with over 2,000 animated characters and rarely even had an argument.
Wow.
Um, in 1992, Joe met with Michael Jackson to get him to sing in Tom and Jerry the movie, to get him to do a song for Tom and Jerry the movie. It fell through. They didn't get to do it, but they exchanged autographs. And I want to read you what Michael Jackson's autograph to Joe Barbera said. Kind of
Okay.
sad. It says, "To my hero of yesterday, today, and tomorrow, with many thanks for all the many cartoon friends you gave me as a child. They were all I had."
Wow.
And Michael Jackson famously didn't have a childhood, right?
Yeah.
Kind of lost his childhood, and you can picture him like having those guys as, and whatever you think about Michael Jackson, but it's kind of it's a sad thing to write that the cartoons is all you had, but
Yeah.
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 So
Very, very sad.
the only thing I really want to close this with is I started wondering whatever happened to Saturday morning cartoons, because it's not a thing anymore, right?
No, it's not.
And we could probably list some things that have happened in terms of like video games and even videotape and the Disney Channel and Nickelodeon and the Cartoon Network, right? And those kind of things. But actually, it gets a little more involved than that. First of all, the rise of Saturday morning cartoons didn't come until the mid 60s. And advertisers loved that 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. slot, just like you mentioned earlier, for selling toys and telling
Yeah.
cereals. And they were low cost shows, like you already said. And the other great thing about those shows is that kids don't care if they're reruns. Adults don't like it when you show the same episode, but kids actually kind of like that.
Yeah, I've seen this one, it's great.
Yeah, exactly. Little kids like repetition. Anybody that has kids knows that. And they would run those primetime shows of the Flintstones and the Jetsons. They would run them on Saturday mornings. So maybe if the kid was in bed and the parents were watching it by themselves, they would watch it on Saturday mornings. And then they would also show the older cartoons from the 40s on for like the Warner Brothers cartoons. They would show those on Saturday mornings as well. And in the 60s, the cartoons that they showed were all about kind of pop culture things at the time. Like the Beatles had a cartoon, and the Jackson 5 and the Osmonds and the Archies and Josie and the Pussycats that Hanna-Barbera did. And do you remember Lancelot Link, the chimp, the chimp that solved mysteries?
I
You don't remember him?
No, not really. I remember Hong Kong
He was
Phooey. Was he Hanna-Barbera?
Lancelot Link was not a cartoon. Hong Kong Phooey was Hanna-Barbera, but Lancelot Link was not a cartoon. It was just a Saturday morning show about a chimp who solved crimes.
Okay.
Oh, you would have loved it.
Oh, wow.
And the Monkees actually were not a cartoon, but they were on Saturday mornings as well. Well, then in the 70s, they went from kind of music-based cartoons to everything was a ripoff of primetime shows. So in the 70s, you had cartoons. The Brady Bunch had a cartoon. Gilligan's Island became Gilligan's Planet, and they were marooned on a planet. Laverne and Shirley had a cartoon.
Did they really?
The Dukes of Hazzard had a cartoon. Happy Days had a cartoon. The Partridge, everyone they would either put everybody in space because of the Jetsons. So there was a show called Partridge Family 2200.
Wow.
Which was a Partridge Family in the year 2200.
Solving mysteries and singing songs.
It's so funny because everything just changed from one style to that style. And then in the 80s, because of Star Wars toys got real popular, in the 80s cartoons were all about toys. Then you had the Masters of the Universe and G.I. Joe and Transformers and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. That's after us, but that's what happened to cartoons after then. And then during kind of the Reagan administration, they decided to really crack down on these, what they called EI laws, educational information laws, that said that in order to have a license, the FCC required these networks or local stations to have 3 hours a week of children's educational programming. Now, that was always the law, but they kind of got away with, they kind of went away from that. Like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles isn't educational, but nobody was really
Right,
caring
right.
about that. But with the Reagan administration, they decided they were really going to crack down. Like Tipper Gore was all over the music at the time, remember?
Yeah.
And that's when you started seeing things. Well, in the 70s, you started seeing Schoolhouse Rock, right? And that would trying to do these kind of things. But this EI mandate, and in fact, our friend Weird Al Yankovic had a Saturday morning show that only lasted 13 episodes. And they used to get on him all the time about, you have to make it educational. You have to have a moral. So he would have a guy come out at the beginning of the show and he would scream the moral of this, like, this show, the moral of this show is, and then they said they would.
What was it, a
then they
cartoon
wouldn't
or
have to
was it
worry
a
about
live
it.
action?
It was, I believe it was a cartoon. I
Wow.
think it was a cartoon.
Okay.
But yeah, because I think Billy West was the guy that did that shouted the moral, and he's the guy that does all those like Futurama and all those. He's a famous voice actor.
Wow.
So the educational information mandate, these cartoon people stopped watching this stuff because it was going to be boring. Then came the Disney Channel and Nickelodeon, the Cartoon Network, where you could watch cartoons 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
Then came VHS, video games. One article I read that talked about the death of Saturday morning cartoons actually blamed some of it on divorce rates going higher. And now Saturday morning was a time where you got picked up by the co-parent.
Oh, yeah.
And so you weren't just watching I don't know how much you can give that, but things definitely changed. So rock and roll might not be dead, but definitely Saturday morning cartoons are dead.
Yeah.
And this might be a good time to mention that we're going to do a little bit more of these whatever happened tos.
Yeah.
On the off weeks where we're not publishing Dirt Nap Cities, you and I are going to have little 10 to 15 minute episodes where we talk about whatever happened to. So like whatever happened to Saturday morning cartoons.
Yeah.
Why doesn't anybody say this thing anymore? Why doesn't anybody do this thing, or whatever happened to these things we used to see? Just a little reminisce, just to you and me talk about a little bit of, so people can get their Dirt Nap City fix on the off weeks.
Yeah.
Where we talk about things other than people that are dead.
Customs and sayings and traditions and things like that that are dead.
Sure.
That might be popular in Dirt Nap City, but don't really do much up here anymore.
Well, that's Hanna-Barbera, buddy.
Wow. No, it's funny. Definitely two names that I haven't thought of in a long time, but immediately, when you said Scooby Doo, or when I said Scooby Doo, and then you said yes, that was in the right vein. I remember the logo. I remember the look. And now that you say it, I don't think I realized so many of those cartoons were made by the same creators. But now that you say it, it makes sense because they have a very similar look.
And you're churning them out.
Yeah.
Just churning them out.
Factory.
Well, quantity over quality, for sure. But those guys lived a long time, and they lived as really good friends, and they were business partners that never argued. And I think there's something to be said about a relationship that can last like 60 years without an argument.
Yeah.
And making a lot of money together. Well, they didn't make a ton of money.
Well, making things though that have had stood the test of time in terms of culture, right? I mean,
well, they had a very comfortable life, right? I mean, 12 million is not nothing to sneeze at.
No.
Compared to what they put out there, though, and like you said, the IP is crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, the Flintstones movie probably made more than those guys ever made.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the 1960s, but yeah, it feels like on today's standards, when you start talking about licensing vitamins and toys and cameos and cereal boxes and all the stuff that these faces, t-shirts that these cartoon characters go on, that's where you make your money. You don't make your money on the movies. You make your money on all the licensing and the toys.
Yeah, and I think we talked about that when we talked about Jim Henson.
Yeah. Wow. And even I saw the documentary about Bob, the painter, Bob Ross. His image is still being sold, even though he's died.
Oh yeah.
Wow. Well, I enjoyed that. two people I would have never. This is your superpower, Alex, is to pick people that I would never think of to explore and then explore them very well. So thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, that's episode 1 of season 3. We're not probably going to do 41 episodes like season 2 of the Jetsons.
And we're not going to wait 30 years to do the next season.
Well, you never know. You never know. We'll see how this goes. We'll see how season 3 goes. Maybe season 4 will be in 20 years. Who knows?
Yeah, and you know, if you're wanting it, here it is.
All right. Oh, that was good. That was good. All right, take care, everybody.
Bye.